Okay, so now that we've seen how to verify ID tokens in the update and delete endpoints, the next question is how do we actually convert over our create endpoint to do the same thing? Well, our create endpoint is going to be a little bit different here, right? The process for doing this is going to be a little bit different. And in order to understand why, let's open up the code on the front end that's actually going to be making the request here. Okay, that's going to be inside our create account page. Actually, our create account page uses the use auth hook, so that's where this is going to be. Let's open that up. And what we're going to see is that our front end is creating a user with email and password on Firebase auth. It's getting the result, and then it's actually getting the token and the ID here and sending that to the server. Now, one thing I just realized here is that this should be await result.user.getIDToken. I must have forgotten that earlier. But essentially, because of the way our server can verify ID tokens and get the corresponding user for them from Firebase, we actually don't need to specify the result.user.id thing here, right? We can get that inside the server endpoint itself without the client side trying to send that along. So we're going to remove that here because we don't need it. And really all we need to do, we're still going to need this token here because we want to send that with the headers. But basically what we can do now is if we open up our create endpoint, we're not going to be getting the ID from the request body anymore, as I said. What we're going to be doing is getting the auth token from the headers. Okay, this part is like what we've seen before. Const auth token equals request.headers. And then we're going to use the verify ID token function to get the corresponding user. Again, this is pretty much what we've seen before up until this point. We're going to say try. We'll say const auth user equals admin dot auth dot verify ID token auth token. Oops, and that should be await here. We'll say await admin dot auth dot verify ID token. We're going to have to change this to async. And once we have this auth user, that's when we're going to try and create this new user. So essentially, we're going to move this line here where we actually create the user into the try catch block. And instead of allowing the client side to just specify any ID they want, we're going to specifically use the ID of the auth user that we got from Firebase. Okay, so this will ensure that the user's ID in our fake little database up here, that'll make sure that that lines up perfectly with the actual ID that we're using in Firebase. Right, so that'll make sure that a user or a hacker can't fudge that ID property. Okay, and inside here, we're going to put the response.sendStatus now, and we're going to say catch error. In the case that there's an error verifying the ID token, all we're going to do is say response.sendStatus 401, and that will basically tell the client side, hey, you've got to include an ID token if you want to be able to do that. So this should work just like before. Let's take a look at our app and see if everything is good. We're going to go to our create account page. And for the email, I'm going to enter in sean10@gmail.com. For the password, I'm going to say abc123. Same thing here. Full name. Oops. Wanted to say W there. And for short bio, I'll just say hello. And we'll say create account. And what you'll see here is a very strange error that it actually took me a little while to figure out, so I thought I'd share it with you. Basically, we see that we're not getting the name and bio. However, if we refresh this page now, we'll see that the name and bio decide to turn up. Right? The reason that our name and bio don't show up right after we click create account is because we've created a sort of race condition of sorts in our code. Let me show you this by going to our use auth hook. So what's happening here is when we call this create user with email and password function, this actually logs the user in immediately. And remember that when the user logs in, we also immediately redirect the user away from the create account page. So what's happening is this function is being called, the user is going to the home page, and the home page starts trying to load data from the server here before this line of code has had a chance to be called. Right? So in other words, at the point in time when our home page is trying to load this user's data from the server, that data hasn't actually been created yet because this post function, right, axios.post, this hasn't been called yet, or if it has been called, it's still in the process of completing. So the server basically returns nothing to the home page saying, yeah, I don't know, that's not a user. So what we need to do here is basically we need to make it so that our server is the one that ends up creating our user with the email and password instead of our front end. Now, this is generally considered a good practice anyway, right, to have the server be the one that does it. So what I'm going to do is we're going to open up server.js, and we're going to take a slightly different approach to what we've seen before. So first of all, in addition to the user info, we're also going to have the client side include the email and password for the user in the request body. So in useauth here, we're going to basically remove this create user with email and password function here. We're going to remove token, right? So we won't be sending an auth token along with our headers yet. And we're going to be including the email and password in the post request body. So we'll say email and password, and we don't need auth here either. So you might be wondering now, how does the user's account actually get created? Well, basically in the server, we now have to use a Firebase admin function called create user to create a user with that specified email, password, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove this auth user thing since we don't need that anymore, right? We're not verifying tokens or anything. And instead, what we're going to do is say const new user equals, and here we'll actually say auth user, I guess for that, equals await admin.auth.create user. Okay, and basically what we do is we pass an object to this create user function now that will take the email. Okay, so we're passing in the email. It'll take their password, so we'll pass that in as well. And that's pretty much all we need for now. So that's going to generate that new user for us and return it here, so we should still be able to use this UID that Firebase auth adds to it. Okay, and that's about it. We also don't need this auth token up here, so we can delete that. And let's give this a try now. What we're going to do is go back to our use auth hook. And one last thing that we're going to have to do is after the user is created in Firebase auth, right, after this request completes, we're going to have to log the user in. Because when we called create user with email and password on the client side, remember that automatically logged the user in. But calling it on the server side, right, this create user thing, doesn't actually do that. So all we're going to have to do is just use the login function and call that with the email and password that the user provided. So we'll say email password. I believe that's all we needed for that one. Yep, just email password. And we'll also want to say await login for that. And that should be all we need to do. So let's give this thing a try. What we're going to do is we're going to log out of sean10@gmail.com. We're going to try creating an account now with sean11@gmail.com. Same password as usual. Full name. Oops, let's try that again. There we go. And hello for the bio. We're going to click create account now. And sure enough, after a second or two, we should be redirected to our homepage where we see that our name and bio are now correctly displayed. Now, one other thing is that with deleting accounts, right, now that we've used the create account function with Firebase auth, with deleting accounts, you may have noticed that even though we're deleting the user's data from our database, we're not actually deleting the account from Firebase. Now, if you want to add that functionality into here as well, what you can do is use Firebase admin's delete user function. Okay, so what we're going to do with that is underneath where we delete the user from our database, we're going to say await admin.auth.delete user ID, and that will take care of deleting that specified user from Firebase auth. So let's give that one a try. What we're going to do is delete our sean11@gmail.com by clicking delete account. And we're actually going to have to recreate this account because our server restarted. And since we're not using MongoDB, we actually, when we restart our server, that gets rid of the data that we created. So let's try this again. We're going to say log out. We're going to create another account. We're up to Sean12 now, so we'll say Sean12 at gmail.com. Regular password, full name, and short bio, blah, blah, blah. So let's create our account now. Make sure you don't restart your server now, and click delete my account. And that should basically delete all that information and log you out. And furthermore, if you go back to your Firebase console now, you should not see Sean12, right? We created it and then we just deleted it. Great, so now our create account functionality and our delete account functionality are working just like we want them to. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.